Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where executive coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Okay, so in this episode, what we're going to do is discuss some ways that I have seen thematically us as leaders avoiding some conversations. So some of these themes might feel familiar to you. And the way that we may be feeling is a sense of dread or anxiety, or we may be not able to sleep. If any of that feels and sounds familiar, I'm going to give you some solutions that I've worked through with my clients this year in order to get to the other side of feeling better, of being able to work through some of these difficult conversations and work through the ability to face them time and time again, because they understand the root causes of why it's happening and how to get better at the skill of moving through it. All right. So I'll go through this. We'll talk through, again, ways I see us avoiding them, why we may be doing so, and some solutions on how to work through it. All right, so let's dive right in. So the first one that I see is that we build up the conversation to be so much more difficult and daunting than it actually is. And so therefore we then avoid it. So what this may look like, it's like building the mountain out of the molehill, and using that expression, where we got this conversation that we want to have it, but we keep building up how we think it's going to go, how we think that the other person's going to react, how we don't want to feel the discomfort of working through it. And then we just keep building and building and building and building it up to a point where it's like the difficulty level feels like it's like a 10 of 10, when really going through it, and what I've seen as I've coached you as you work through the other side of it, I've seen so many leaders get coached through and move through it. That really, after on the other side of it, it actually is a 2 of 10 or 1 of 10. And it feels like such an immense sense of relief on the other side of it, that they're so happy that they had this conversation and that they moved through it, that it just really wasn't worth all the buildup. So it's choosing in this way, like we choose sometimes to suffer in advance. So if you notice yourself doing this, like, again, why say suffer in advance? Because we build it up. We feel super anxious. We don't sleep at night. We choose to suffer because of how we're feeling about it. And it's funny, we choose to suffer ahead of time instead, because we're trying to avoid. So instead of, I don't want to say suffer, but suffer is a strong word, but feeling uncomfortable, because we want to avoid feeling discomfort in having the conversation. And a lot of times we look at the downsides. We look at ways that we think it will go poorly, and we don't look at the upside. Most people I, again, talk to, they experience such relief on the other side of it. They're so happy that they had the conversation and they feel so much better, and they don't realize how it improves the situation, because they spend so much time giving airtime to the ways that they think it's going to go wrong and the difficulty level ahead of time. So just notice if this feels familiar, if you feel like you're suffering ahead of time, if you feel like you're making it bigger than it needs to be, if you feel like you just can't let go of this buildup, right? Of feeling like you need to think through every angle and you need to like really like in your head navigate through this. Consider, okay, number one, what are the upsides of having the conversation? 2, identify why you want to have the conversation in the first place. This really can help. So you can make a list, and it can even be a pro-con list if you want. So maybe why you want to have the conversation. What are some really compelling reasons? And are you willing to go after that reason? Like something that will be compelling, that will make action inevitable. So it could be something like thinking through for yourself, who you want to be in your values and your leadership skills, like who you want to be as a leader. Do you want to lead with transparency, openness, direct feedback, direct conversations, or whatever that may look like for you as a leader? And maybe think through what you're willing to do for the other person on the other side of it. So do you want to help them further the career? And this feedback would help. Do you want to help them understand whatever the, again, task at hand may look like, or whatever the work that is ahead of them, whatever it is, whatever is going on for both you and that person? What is a compelling reason of committing to having a conversation? And then you can say, what am I willing to do for that compelling reason? So am I willing to feel uncomfortable because I want to be a great leader and I care about this person's career? The answer is probably always yes, right? And so I think it'll help you look through this difficult conversation in this lens of definitely in service to the person that is receiving the conversation as well as yourself. And also look at the upside. So if you're using, again, building this up, use some skills to be able to look at it in a different light and a different angle, rather than allowing yourself to just spin in all the ways that it will feel difficult. Okay. So having a more balanced approach. All right. That's number one. Another thing that I hear a lot is sometimes our brains have really clever ways of talking ourselves out of having difficult conversations. We tell ourselves these lies, these stories about avoiding difficult conversations, and they feel super believable. Even if they're not based in reality, even if they're not based in fact, they seemingly give us this great reason and excuse to not have difficult conversations. All right, so why do we do this? As humans, we all come with a set of beliefs. They're beliefs that are shaped by our experience of the world, right? We grew up in a certain location, in a certain household, in a friend set, school. We're shaped by our families, our religion, our environment. We're all shaped by previous work experiences. Again, whatever we were brought up and experienced before coming to this exact moment, we're all brought up with these beliefs that we've sort of shaped and molded and adopted over time. And at times we can believe these beliefs so deeply that even when we're challenged that they're not factual, it can be super hard to see that they're just thoughts and not based in reality and fact. It feels like these beliefs are so true, even when they're not. So I know this, I'm going to give you some tangible examples here, but I just want us to consider if some of these might be true. If you find yourself telling yourself some reasons that you shouldn't have difficult conversations that feel super true, but may not actually be true. So what this can sound like, I've heard people tell me and say things like, well, I'm just not good at having tough conversations. Or I'm just not good at giving direct feedback. And they just say it like it's fact, as if it was skill that we're just all born with, or you're not, and it's unchangeable. Just matter of fact. I've also heard people tell me, after having maybe a conflict or disagreement or not seeing eye to eye, I've had people say, well, things seem fine now. Why bring it back up? And so, again, this may be true in some situations. However, if there was a situation that was never addressed and the working relationship and productivity is still strained and not productive, and again, and I will give a caveat, as long as nothing immoral, illegal, or, extremely on the extreme exceptions here has gone on, I believe that if we've had a conflict, disagreement, or not seeing eye to eye, and you're still feeling on your end that the relationship is strained and not productive, it can feel true while things may seem fine, but just because nothing's being said does not mean that it's fine. Okay. So watch your brain as it may tell you that lie. Third one, another thing I hear sometimes about leaders interacting with other people or even direct reports is, surely they must know. They should just get it. They should know this by now. And really, we're putting a responsibility on the other person and assuming that they should just know a collective shared set of information that they believe that should just be known as fact and true. Okay. And so they don't trying to abdicate responsibility of telling the other person or setting expectations or delivering feedback because they're giving the other person all the credit that they should just get it and they should know. All right. Fourth lie that I hear, or fourth thing that is sometimes a belief that may not be true, about avoiding conversations. Some people will say things like, having difficult conversations just not part of my personality. And they'll use things like, I'm an introvert. And so again, while maybe you are an introvert and that may be factual, having difficult conversations, saying it's not part of my personality, again, just abdicates it as if it's a fixed set thing. And if we were all born inherently having the ability to have conversations or not, and it was a personality trait, then I can assume no responsibility to have that conversation. Okay. So watch your brain for that one. The last one, again, one theme that I've heard is sometimes they say people avoid difficult conversations by saying, well, I talked to them once. I tried and it didn't work. So watch this one. It also suggests that the other person needs to do something different or change in order for the conversation to quote unquote work. And notice how it's a lie that we may use to try to get ourselves out of having another conversation. All right. So those are just examples. I hear lots of different ones, but those are some ones that sometimes come up commonly. So again, because these are beliefs, these are just things that we're deciding that they're true or not. Really, I want you to take a step back and look at some of these. If some of these felt familiar to you, if you find any version of that feels familiar, just consider, do you want to question that belief? Is it 100% true? And do you want to keep thinking that thought? Another question you could ask is, what if it wasn't true? What would you do if it either wasn't true or if the opposite were in fact true? And so you can think things like, okay, if it was a part of my personality to have difficult conversations, what would I do in this situation? Or if I was good at having difficult and tough conversations, what would I do? All right. And just consider, why am I believing and why am I choosing to believe this belief in order to avoid this difficult conversation? And again, this one's a tough one because sometimes these are beliefs that we've believed for so long that they just feel true. And again, this is where coaching can help so much to start to challenge you on the beliefs and thoughts that you have been thinking for so long that they just inherently just feel true. Okay. All right. Number 3, one thing I hear about avoiding difficult conversations is that we tend to think, or sometimes choose to think, that something has gone terribly wrong if it feels the slightest bit uncomfortable. So we think, okay, I feel uncomfortable, it feels tense, it doesn't feel good. And so therefore, something has gone terribly wrong. The way this may sound, I've heard people say things like, it shouldn't be this hard, or this conversation is just so tense and it's just so uncomfortable. And they think that as if this is not supposed to be the way that we should feel. And sometimes people even put it on themselves, again, that it's their responsibility and something's wrong with them. Like, something is wrong with me. I can't do this. I have a wrong skill set, all of these things. Now, I will say this again, as human beings, we are wired for connection. And so I want to share with you, as a solution to this, just having the knowledge that it's supposed to be uncomfortable and there's a reason for it can help. Like I said, we're wired for connection and we want and like to be part of communities and groups. And the reason for that, it's primal. We want to be a part of the community, to feel like we're safe, we're part of the group, we're part of prehistoric, we were part of the tribe, right? So that if we get separated, we will not get eaten. So we want to be part of the community and group so it feels safe. So when we go out and we have our perception of these difficult conversations, fight or flight kicks in. We get nervous, anxious about being ousted from the group. And this is all normal. This is a normal part of our brain, just trying to keep us safe. So a lot of times we want to tell ourselves like, oh my gosh, something is going terribly wrong. I feel super uncomfortable. This feels hard. It shouldn't be this hard. It feels tense. Your brain's just going crazy. It feels like I need to run and escape this. Okay. So just note, first off, this is normal. I am safe. Nothing's going wrong. And a way to work through this, again, I think I talk about this in the Difficult Conversations podcast, is to do the reps. Somebody said this to me earlier this week as I was talking to someone about difficult conversations, and they were talking about the fact that as a leader, they had years and years of experience of having difficult conversations. And it was funny that people would say to them, well, it's just part of your personality and you make it look so natural and it comes so easy to you. When really the person had said, I actually did the reps. And I thought that was a great way of putting it, to get better at it, to overcome this thought of like something's gone wrong, it feels uncomfortable. It's totally counterintuitive, but you have to do the reps in order to get better at it. To build confidence by doing the difficult thing, you move through it. So even if it feels uncomfortable, even if you don't feel confident going through it, on the other side of it, when you have that conversation, you see that, oh, I'm not going to die from a difficult conversation. You work through it, move through it, and then build that skill set to have that conversation over and over again. And again, it may not get to the point where it's ever easy. I coach leaders at all different levels and all different experiences, backgrounds, industries, etc. And the one thing that I said, it totally holds true. Difficult conversations is the theme. And it is absolutely something that will continue throughout your career. So it may be something that, again, building the reps, doing the reps and doing the uncomfortable thing will help you get better at it, because it actually will start to rewire that part of your brain that sends you into fight or flight. It'll help you say, okay, we can do this and we can move through it, even if we feel uncomfortable at the same time. Okay, the fourth thing that I see with difficult conversations is, in order to deal with our feelings of not wanting to be vulnerable or face the difficult conversation in an open and curious way, sometimes we'll just decide to villainize the other person in the conversation. And then it makes it easier for us because we feel justified in our feelings of frustration or anger. And then we may come at the conversation a little more aggressively. So here's what this looks like. Sometimes we just have this rule book, or the manual, if you will, this manual of behavior of how we want others and how we believe others should behave. We believe they should be doing it differently. They won't change, or they need to change. And what that does is it puts the focus on them, like basically like what they're doing wrong, how they should be doing it, how they need to do it differently. And it puts all the responsibility on them, makes them the bad guy in this situation. And then we just start to justify our feelings. We start to justify like, well, of course I feel frustrated and angry. And then it allows us to come at the conversation differently and aggressively. Now, notice that again, if you find yourself villainizing the other person in the conversation, unjustifiably so, right? We're using it as an out. One solution that we can approach to is to try to step into, before we have the conversation, is to step into curiosity and maybe think through other reasons. Like, why could they be doing what they're doing based on their beliefs that may have led them to these actions? So I'll give you an example of how I've seen this. I was coaching two individuals that worked at the same organization, and these colleagues were working towards the same goal, but they had two different viewpoints. One was like leading the initiative and was like kind of like the PM for the entire project. And they were trying to enact change for this organization. And their goal was to start these cross-functional partnerships and start to like see the company move forward with some big changes. The person that was helping to work on this project was really wanting definitely to help make this change, but she also wanted to make sure that her team member got some credit for the work that they were doing. They were, a direct report, and they were trying to champion this person and make sure that they got some credit, right, for this work. And so it was altruistic in the sense of them leading this person, and the other person was altruistic in trying to do this massive initiative. And it was interesting because until they had discussed both of their perspectives about what they wanted out of this project, they were sort of villainizing each other and telling stories that were not true about what they thought the other person wanted. And neither side was right. Neither side was right about it, even though, again, they both had a shared mission that was a great mission to have. So I say this is because I really encourage you to watch if you're starting to tell yourself stories that villainize the other person without, again, there's a theme here without it being based in reality, about it being based in fact. And if we notice ourselves trying to, lean towards frustration or anger and trying to make the other person the bad guy so that we can be the hero in this story, just notice that and decide if we want to approach it differently, maybe with curiosity. Why are they doing what they're doing? How could we be curious in this situation and not villainize the other person? Okay. All right. This rounds out the series number 5. It's going to round out my 5th one that I see, the 5th theme that I see people using to avoid difficult conversations is the belief that the conversation is meant to be had so that the other person will change and not necessarily for our growth as leaders. So a lot of people will try to decide to have the conversation based on what the outcome of what the other person will do or what they want the other person to do, not just for the inherent growth that they may experience as a leader. So what this can look like. So either we avoid or we dislike having these difficult conversations because we think that the goal of the conversation is for the other person to change. And what this can sound like is wanting to have like this perfect script and these perfect talking points that will drive an outcome for the other person to behave differently than they are. And so they want like this perfect script, or they want, like, again, they want to drive and to dominate the conversation, not lead with curiosity, so the other person will just change on the other side. And so another way to look at this is to think about our own growth and our own capacity for a skill set to have difficult conversations. And when we can get to the point where we're using each one as a learning opportunity, not only to be curious about the other person, of course, like to get to know them better, their goals, their motivations, their beliefs, but also to get to know ourselves better, then we end up with this win-win situation. And knowing that the goal of having these conversations is not to drive change in the other person or to achieve some sort of utopia and perfection, but can also be to deepen that relationship, to try new approaches, to try different tactics of having difficult conversations, to see what works for you, for them, and with all the different people in your life. And like I said about that leader earlier, the person that was doing the reps to have the difficult conversations, it's amazing who you can become on the other end of it. And even if the other person on the other end of the conversation that you're having it with changes or doesn't change, that's not necessarily the goal. And I know that can be a firmly held belief that we all have too, is that we want others to behave differently, but really look at how you are showing up as a leader and having these difficult conversations and the growth that you can experience as a part of it. Again, I've been fortunate to coach leaders at all levels of different organizations. And there's one thread that holds so true. And it's really this, it's that skill of having difficult conversations is so needed. It's one that I have never seen perfected. And at each level, we are all humans that are changing and evolving and having conversations with another human that is also changing and evolving. And so to let go of this goal of this perfect conversation and always knowing that or believing that you will know exactly the perfect words to say, it can be so healthy just to let that go. And to know, though, that then the goal is growth, and avoiding the conversation is rarely ever the answer. Okay. And so, okay, that's it. That's a wrap. Those are the 5 ways that I see people avoiding difficult conversations by some of the tactics and the things that they're telling themselves. And like I said, 2024 is right around the corner. And if this is a situation where you find yourself maybe struggling, or an area where you're really wanting just to get results faster, this is exactly what I do. I help work through some of the very specific challenges and situations that you are facing in a one-on-one environment virtually. And we talk through it and we work through helping you to unpack and peel away all the layers of difficulty and help you get clarity around facing the challenge that's right ahead of you. It's not cookie cutter, pulled off the internet, anything you can Google. It is custom and bespoke to you because you are unique and the situation that you're facing is unique. So that is how I can help one-on-one. So if you find that you are struggling with this and want to talk through what a coaching engagement could look like, I am looking at clients for 2024 and I'm totally open to having the conversation with you. You can get a hold of me through my website. It's aliciacowancoaching.com. Always in the show notes. It's ELISIAKEOWN coaching.com. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. We're about to wrap up 2023 and could not be more grateful to have you as a listener. All right. Thanks for listening and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.